Nobody in that marble lobby expected the cleaner to survive the humiliation, but one quiet sentence from her made the millionaire's fiancé lose control in front of everyone. "Get back to work. Now." Vanessa Hart's voice sliced through the grand lobby of the Whitmore estate. Crystal glasses trembled on the side table. A white rose slipped from its vase and landed on the polished floor. In the center of the room stood Grace Miller, the house cleaner, holding a damp silver tray against her chest. She did not move. She did not lower her eyes. Vanessa crossed the room in sharp, angry steps, her heels clicking like warnings. "Are you deaf?" she snapped. "I told you to clean that hallway before Charles gets home. Or do I need to have you thrown out today?" Two guests froze near the entrance. A waiter stopped breathing for a second. No one defended Grace. Slowly Grace placed the tray on the table. She folded the cloth in her hands with careful, steady fingers. "I finished the hallway 2 hours ago," she said softly. "You may check it yourself." Vanessa leaned closer, her face burning with rage. "You are the help. The help does not answer back." Then Grace did something no one expected. She raised one open palm between them. Not to fight. Not to beg. Just to stop the cruelty from coming any closer. And in a calm voice she said, "Your voice does not reach here." The lobby went silent. Even the old clock seemed to stop. Vanessa blinked, shocked. Because for the first time the woman she tried to break had not broken at all. The silence did not last long. Vanessa Hart could not stand silence. She needed people afraid. She needed eyes lowered. She needed rooms to bend around her. But Grace Miller stood there in the middle of that shining lobby, one hand raised, her face calm, her breathing steady. And that calmness made Vanessa even angrier. "What did you just say to me?" Vanessa asked. Her voice was lower now. Sharper. The kind of voice that did not shout because it wanted to cut deeper. Grace kept her hand in the air. Not high. Not dramatic. Just enough to place a line between them. "I said your voice does not reach here, Miss Hart." The guests looked at one another. The waiter near the wall swallowed hard. The silver tray in his hands tilted slightly, but he caught it before it fell. A woman in pearls slowly brought her fingers to her mouth as if she had just seen something she was not supposed to see. Vanessa let out a short laugh. It was not real laughter. It was disbelief wrapped in pride. "You think that sounds brave," she said. "You think standing here with your little cloth and your little tray makes you strong." Grace lowered her hand just a little, but she did not step back. That was what everyone noticed. She did not step back. Not 1 inch. Vanessa moved closer until there was barely any space between them. Her perfume filled the air, expensive and heavy like flowers kept too long in a closed room. "You work in this house," Vanessa whispered. "You clean what we leave behind. You polish floors other people walk on. You carry plates. You open doors. That is your place." Grace listened. Her face did not harden. Her eyes did not flare. She simply listened the way a person listens to rain hitting a window from the inside of a warm house. Then she spoke. "My place is wherever I can stand with clean hands." The words were soft. But they landed hard. The woman in pearls looked down. The young man holding the event notebook stopped writing. His pen hovered above the page, frozen in midair. Even the old grandfather clock in the corner seemed louder now, every tick pressing into the room like a heartbeat. Vanessa's smile disappeared. "Clean hands," she repeated. "Do not talk to me about clean hands." Grace's fingers tightened around the folded cloth. Only for a second. Almost no one saw it. But the old housekeeper standing half-hidden near the hallway did. He saw the tiny change in her grip. He saw how much strength it took for her not to tremble. Vanessa turned slightly, making sure the guests could hear her. "This is what happens when people forget who they are," she said. "You give them a paycheck and suddenly they think they have a voice." Grace looked at her. "I do have a voice." Vanessa stepped back as if Grace had slapped her. But Grace had not moved. She had only spoken. "You may correct my work," Grace continued. "You may ask me to clean the floors again. You may tell me the silver is not polished enough or the hallway is not ready. That is part of my job." Her voice stayed even. No anger. No pleading. Just truth. "But there is a place inside me where your anger cannot enter." The room changed. You could feel it. The air felt heavier. The marble walls, the tall windows, the white roses, the polished staircase, all of it seemed to lean closer. Grace went on. "That place belonged to my mother before it ever belonged to me. She taught me to keep it safe. She taught me that work can bend your back, but it does not have to bend your soul." Vanessa stared at her. For the first time she did not have an answer ready. Grace's eyes lowered for a moment, not in weakness but in memory. "My mother cleaned houses too," she said. "She washed other people's dishes. She scrubbed floors until her knees swelled. She came home with cracked hands and still found a way to smile at me like the world had not taken anything from her." The waiter blinked quickly. The woman in pearls stopped pretending she was not listening. Grace lifted her eyes again. So, yes, Miss Hart, you can speak loudly. You can embarrass me. You can threaten my job in front of strangers. But you cannot reach the part of me my mother protected. Vanessa's face flushed red. Not from shame. Not yet. From rage. How dare you, she said. Her voice rose. It cracked on the last word. Grace said nothing. That seemed to anger Vanessa even more. How dare you stand in this house and speak to me about your mother as if anyone here cares, Vanessa snapped. Your mother was probably just another woman scrubbing floors for decent families. And now you think that makes you noble? The old housekeeper's eyes closed. The guests went still. Even the young man with the notebook lowered his pen. Because everyone felt it. Vanessa had crossed a line she could not see. Grace's face changed. Not much. But enough. The softness remained, but something deeper came forward. Something steady, something rooted. Something no insult could reach. Do not speak about my mother. The words were quiet. Too quiet. That made them worse. Vanessa blinked. Grace took one slow breath. Please, she added. That single word did not sound weak. It sounded like a final warning wrapped in manners. Do not speak about my mother again. No one moved. Outside, the tall windows' sunlight touched the garden. Somewhere beyond the glass, a car door closed in the distance, but inside the lobby nobody turned their head. They were all watching Grace. The cleaner. The woman Vanessa had called nobody. She stood beneath the chandelier with her work dress still damp at the sleeve, her hands rough from honest labor, her eyes bright but dry. And she looked taller than everyone in the room. Vanessa opened her mouth but nothing came out. For a few seconds she was not the elegant fiancée of Charles Whitmore. She was not the woman with diamond rings and perfect hair and power waiting to fall into her hands. She was only a cruel woman standing in front of someone she could not crush. And that terrified her. Grace lowered her hand at last. Slowly. Carefully. As if the gesture had meant exactly what she said it meant. The cruelty had come close. But it had not entered. She picked up the folded cloth from the table, smoothed its edge once and placed it beside the tray. Then she looked at Vanessa one more time. I will finish my work, Grace said. But I will not let you speak to me like I am empty. The words stayed in the air. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. This was not that kind of moment. It was quieter than applause. Heavier than shouting. It was the moment a room full of people realized that dignity does not always arrive wearing a suit, holding a title, or owning the house. Sometimes dignity stands in a cleaner's uniform with tired hands, a steady voice, and a mother's memory burning like a candle inside her chest. And Vanessa Hart, for all her money, all her beauty, all her borrowed power, could not blow that candle out. Nobody said her name. Nobody had to. For the first time since Grace Miller had walked into the Whitmore estate 7 months earlier, everyone in that lobby was truly seeing her. Not as the woman who polished the brass handles. Not as the quiet figure who moved through hallways before guests arrived. Not as the help. They saw a woman standing in the center of power with nothing in her hands but a folded cleaning cloth and something far stronger than fear. Dignity. Vanessa Hart felt it too. That was why her face tightened. That was why her perfect smile never returned. She had spent weeks ruling the staff with small punishments. A sharp look here, a cold insult there. A tray sent back for no reason. A hallway inspected twice just to make someone feel small. And every time the house had allowed it. The staff lowered their heads. The guests pretended not to hear. Charles Whitmore was always away at the office, trusting that the woman he planned to marry was graceful, polished, worthy of his family name. But now the truth had stepped into the light. And it was wearing Grace Miller's tired shoes. Vanessa looked around the room, searching for help. That was the first crack. She looked at the guests expecting sympathy. The woman in pearls would not meet her eyes. She looked at the waiter expecting obedience. He stared down at the tray in his hands. She looked toward the hallway expecting one of the senior staff to step forward and rescue the old order of things. No one moved. Not one person. For the first time, Vanessa Hart stood alone in a room she thought belonged to her. Grace stood still, her breathing slow. She was not trying to win. That made the moment even more powerful. A person trying to win can be argued with. A person trying to prove something can be mocked. But Grace was not performing. She was not building a scene. She was simply refusing to disappear. Vanessa's voice returned brittle and shaking. You are making a very serious mistake. Grace looked at her. No, Miss Hart, she said. I made my mistake in staying quiet too long. The words were soft, but the room felt them like thunder. The young man with the event notebook finally wrote something down. One quick line, then another. His hand moved faster now, no longer pretending this was just an argument before lunch. He understood what everyone was beginning to understand. This was the moment the engagement lunch stopped being an event. It became a witness stand. Vanessa stepped closer again, but slower this time. Less sure. Her anger was still there, but something else had entered it. Fear. You think they care about you, she whispered. These people, this house, Charles, you think one little speech will change what you are? Grace did not answer immediately. She looked around the lobby. At the marble floor she had cleaned before sunrise. At the silver railings she had polished until she could see the shape of her own face in them. At the flowers she had arranged because Vanessa wanted them lower, then higher, then lower again. At the guest who had watched her humiliation in silence. Then Grace looked back at Vanessa. I know what I am, she said. A faint tremor moved through her voice then, not weakness. Memory. I am the daughter of a woman who worked until her hands bled and still taught me to speak gently. I am a worker. I am honest. I am tired. I am afraid sometimes. But I am not beneath you. The last sentence changed everything. Not beneath you. It was so simple. So clean. So impossible to twist. The waiter's eyes lifted. The woman in pearls pressed her hand tighter against her chest. Somewhere near the hallway the old housekeeper drew in a long quiet breath. He had served the Whitmore family for 30 years, and in all that time he had seen wealth create many illusions, but none more dangerous than the illusion that money made one soul higher than another. Vanessa heard the shift. It was not loud. No one gasped. No one shouted. No one applauded. But the loyalty in the room moved. Just slightly. Away from her. Toward Grace. And Vanessa could not bear it. You are finished here, she snapped. Do you hear me? Finished. I will make sure no family in this city hires you again. Grace blinked once. For the first time something painful crossed her face. Not because Vanessa had power. Because the threat was real. Everyone knew it. A woman like Vanessa could ruin a worker's name with one phone call. A whisper over lunch. A few cruel words to the right people. Suddenly doors closed. Calls stopped. References vanished. Grace knew exactly what that could mean. Rent unpaid. Food stretched thin. Another long search for work. Another morning standing outside a back entrance hoping someone would see more than a uniform. For 3 seconds the room watched the weight of that threat settle on her shoulders. And then Grace straightened. Slowly. She stood taller under it. If telling the truth cost me this job, she said, then I will leave with the truth still inside me. The old clock ticked. Once. Twice. Vanessa's mouth opened but no words came. Because how do you threaten a person who has already decided what cannot be taken? That was the power of Grace Miller in that moment. She had no money. No title. No family name to shield her. But Vanessa had reached for the deepest weapon she had, and it had not worked. The room knew it. Vanessa knew it. Grace knew it. The cruelty that once filled the lobby now had nowhere to go. It hovered above the marble floor, exposed and ugly, no longer disguised as authority. The woman in pearls finally spoke. It was barely more than a whisper. She did nothing wrong. Vanessa turned toward her sharply. What did you say? The older woman lifted her chin. Her hands trembled, but she did not take the words back. I said she did nothing wrong. A small sentence. But in that house at that moment it sounded like a door unlocking. The waiter set his tray down on the side table with a soft metallic sound. Then he stepped back. Not toward Vanessa. Away from her. The young man with the notebook closed it slowly as if sealing the moment inside. Vanessa looked from face to face, stunned by the betrayal she had created herself. You are all being ridiculous, she said. She is manipulating you. Can't you see that? But nobody looked convinced. Grace lowered her eyes for a moment. Not to submit. To breathe. When she lifted them again they were wet, but no tears had fallen. That made it worse. There is a kind of crying people understand. And there is a kind of restraint that breaks them more deeply. Grace had been humiliated in public. Threatened in public. Insulted in the name of her mother in public. And still she did not break. She simply stood there, holding herself together with the quiet strength of every woman who had ever been forced to swallow pain and keep working. The atmosphere in the lobby had changed completely. The mansion no longer felt grand. It felt cold. The chandelier no longer looked beautiful. It looked like something hanging above a truth too heavy for the ceiling to hold. Vanessa's expensive dress, her diamonds, her perfect hair, all of it suddenly seemed thin. Like costume pieces in a play that had ended too soon. And Grace in her plain uniform looked real. That was what exposed Vanessa most. Not an accusation. Not a confession. Reality. The front doors remained closed, but the whole house felt as if someone had opened every window. Air seemed to move again. People seemed to wake from a spell they had agreed to live under because it was easier than speaking. Vanessa took one step back. Only one. But everyone saw it. Grace did not follow. She did not need to. The battle had never been about space. It had been about worth. And Grace had already taken back hers. Then, from beyond the heavy front doors came the low sound of a car pulling into the drive. Tires over gravel. A door opening. Firm footsteps approaching the entrance. Vanessa froze. The waiter looked toward the door. The woman in pearls whispered Charles. Grace turned slightly, the folded cloth still in her hand. No one in that lobby knew what would happen next. But everyone understood one thing. The house had changed before Charles Whitmore ever stepped inside. Because Grace Miller had done what no one else dared to do. She had stood in the middle of cruelty. And she had made it visible. The sound of the car reached the lobby before the man did. A low engine. Gravel under tires. Then silence. For a moment, every person inside the Whitmore estate stood frozen, as if the entire house had taken one deep breath and refused to let it go. Vanessa Hart turned toward the front doors. Her face changed. Not slowly. Instantly. The anger pulled back behind her eyes. The hard line of her mouth softened. Her shoulders dropped just enough to look wounded. In less than 2 seconds, the woman who had threatened Grace Miller in front of a room full of witnesses became someone fragile, elegant, and wronged. It was almost impressive. Almost. Grace saw it. The waiter saw it. The woman in pearls saw it. Even the young man with the notebook saw it, and his pen moved again, fast and silent. Then the front doors opened. Charles Whitmore stepped into the lobby, carrying a bouquet of white orchids. He was still in his dark office suit, his tie loosened from the heat outside his sleeves crisp, his shoes dusted lightly from the front drive. He had the relaxed smile of a man coming home to a celebration. A man who believed the woman he loved was waiting for him in a house full of polished floors, arranged flowers, and polite guests. He stopped after 3 steps. The smile stayed on his face for half a second longer than it should have. Then it faded. He looked at Vanessa first. Then at Grace. Then at the guests standing too still near the entrance. Then at the waiter who looked like he wanted to disappear into the wall. The orchids dipped in his hand. What happened here? Charles asked. No one answered. The question moved through the lobby and died somewhere near the staircase. Vanessa was the first to recover. Charles, she said, and her voice broke perfectly. She crossed toward him quickly, but not too quickly. Just enough to look desperate. Her eyes were already shining. Her hand rose to her chest as if she had been struggling to breathe. My love, I am so glad you are here. Grace watched her. Not with hatred. With recognition. She had seen people perform kindness before. She had seen smiles put on like jewelry. But this was different. Vanessa was rebuilding herself right in front of them, turning cruelty into injury, turning witnesses into props. Charles looked at her hand on his sleeve. Then back at Grace. Vanessa, he said carefully, I asked what happened. Vanessa let out a trembling breath. She insulted me? The words came quickly now. She humiliated me in front of everyone. I asked her to finish a simple task before lunch, and she spoke to me like I was nothing in my own home. Something moved across Charles's face. A small tightening. Not anger. Confusion. Grace noticed it. So did Vanessa. This house is not your home yet, Charles said. The lobby went dead silent. Vanessa's hand slipped from his sleeve. The woman in pearls looked up sharply. The waiter stopped breathing again. Charles seemed almost surprised by his own words, as if they had come from somewhere deeper than thought. Somewhere honest, somewhere tired. Vanessa blinked. What did you say? Charles did not look away. I said this is not your home yet. The sentence stood between them like a locked gate. Vanessa's tears disappeared for one dangerous second. Then they returned, thicker, brighter, more dramatic. Charles, how can you say that to me? She whispered. After everything we have planned? He looked at the flowers in his hand. The orchids were perfect. Too perfect. White petals, delicate stems wrapped in cream paper and tied with a ribbon. He had brought them for her. For the lunch? For the future he had believed he was building. Now they felt strangely heavy. He walked to the nearest chair and placed them over the backrest with great care, as if the flowers were innocent and did not deserve to be crushed by what had just happened. Then he loosened his tie a little more. Grace, he said. Grace lifted her eyes. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Her voice was steady, but her body carried the strain of the last few minutes. Charles saw it now. The tightness in her shoulders. The folded cloth still gripped in one hand. The faint shine in her eyes that told him she had come very close to tears and refused to give anyone the satisfaction. He had seen Grace for 7 months. Or he thought he had. He had seen clean rooms. Folded towels. Fresh flowers. Quiet footsteps in hallways. He had seen a worker who never complained, never interrupted, never asked for anything. But he had not seen the woman. Not until now. Did you insult Miss Hart? He asked. Vanessa turned toward Grace with victory already forming in her eyes. Grace looked at Charles. Then at Vanessa. Then at the room. No sir, she said. I did not insult her. Vanessa laughed sharply. There. She is lying. Grace did not react. Charles raised one hand not toward Grace but toward Vanessa. Let her speak. That simple instruction struck Vanessa harder than a shout. Grace swallowed once. I finished the hallway 2 hours ago. Miss Hart told me to go back and clean it again. I told her it was already done. She became angry. Vanessa scoffed. That is not what happened. Charles did not look at her. Grace continued. She said I was the help and that people like me do not answer back. She threatened to have me dismissed. Then she spoke about my mother. The last words were quieter. Charles heard the change. Everyone did. What did she say about your mother? He asked. Grace's fingers tightened around the cloth. For the first time she looked down. Only for a moment. She said my mother was probably just another woman scrubbing floors for decent families. The woman in pearls closed her eyes. The waiter looked away. The young man's pen stopped. Charles turned slowly toward Vanessa. Vanessa stepped back. Just half a step. But enough. Is that true? He asked. Vanessa's mouth opened. No answer came. That was answer enough. Still she tried. Charles, you have to understand. She was provoking me. She was standing there with this attitude. In front of guests. In front of the staff. She was trying to make me look cruel. Grace's voice came softly from behind her. I did not make you look cruel, Miss Hart. Vanessa turned. Grace met her eyes. You did that yourself? The room absorbed the sentence like a match touching dry paper. Charles stared at Grace. Not because she had spoken boldly. Because she had spoken truthfully. And because no part of her seemed proud of it. She was not enjoying Vanessa's collapse. She was not feeding on revenge. She simply looked tired. Tired in the way people are tired after carrying too much silence for too long. Charles turned to the guests. Did anyone here see what happened? No one moved. The old pattern tried to return. That old cowardly instinct of polite people in wealthy rooms. Do not get involved. Do not offend the powerful. Do not risk being remembered. Then the woman in pearls stepped forward. Her voice shook but she spoke. I saw enough. Vanessa's head snapped toward her. The woman continued. Miss Miller did not raise her voice. She did not threaten anyone. She only asked not to be treated as if she had no dignity. Charles looked at the waiter. The waiter hesitated. Then nodded. She is telling the truth, sir. The young man with the notebook lifted his hand slightly. I wrote down most of it, he said. I was here to document the engagement lunch details. But, I documented this too. Vanessa's face went pale. For the first time, her performance failed completely. Charles looked at her as if a curtain had been pulled back from a painting he had admired for years, revealing rot underneath. Why, he asked. It was not loud. That made it worse. Vanessa blinked. Why what? Why would you speak to her that way? Vanessa's lips trembled. This time not for show. Because she forgot her place. Charles looked at Grace. Then at the marble floor. Then at the staircase. Then at every silent witness in the room. No, he said. I think I forgot mine. Grace looked up. Charles's voice lowered. I forgot that a house is judged by how people are treated inside it, not by how expensive the flowers are. Not by who sits at the head of the table. Not by what name is on the gate. Vanessa whispered, Charles, stop. But he did not. He looked back at Grace. Miss Miller, I am sorry. Grace stood still. The apology seemed to reach her slowly like light moving through deep water. Charles continued. You should never have been spoken to that way in this house. Not by her. Not by anyone. Vanessa's face hardened again. So now you are apologizing to the maid. Charles turned to her. No, he said. I am apologizing to a woman you tried to humiliate. That was the moment Vanessa realized something had truly shifted. Not just the room. Not just the staff. Charles. The man she thought she could bend with tears and beauty and the promise of a glittering future was looking at her like a stranger. The orchid sat forgotten on the chair behind him. White. Perfect. Useless. Grace lowered her eyes, but this time not from fear. From the weight of being defended when she had expected only punishment. Charles took one step toward the library doors. Grace, he said gently, would you come with me? I want to hear everything. Vanessa's voice cracked. Charles, you cannot be serious. He stopped. Then he looked at her. I have never been more serious. The old clock ticked again. Loud. Final. And as Grace Miller walked past the guests toward the library, no one saw a cleaner leaving the lobby. They saw the woman who had changed the house before its owner ever realized it was broken. Vanessa Hart did not follow them right away. For 3 seconds, she stayed in the middle of the lobby with her mouth slightly open, her eyes fixed on Charles Whitmore as if she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. Then she understood. He was not choosing her first. That had never happened before. And the humiliation of it hit her harder than Grace Miller's calm words ever could. "Charles," Vanessa said. Her voice came out small, soft, wounded, perfectly measured. Charles stopped near the library doors, his hand resting on the brass handle. Grace stood a few feet behind him, quiet, still holding the folded cloth like it was the only familiar thing left in the room. Vanessa took one careful step forward. Then another. Her chin trembled, her eyes filled. The tears came fast this time, shining under the chandelier, catching the light exactly the way she needed them to. "My love," she whispered, "please don't do this." Grace did not move. The woman in pearls watched without blinking. The waiter glanced down at the floor. The young man with the notebook slowly opened it again. Because everyone could feel it. Vanessa was not finished. She was only changing costumes. Charles turned back. "Don't do what he asked?" Vanessa pressed one hand to her chest, right over the heart she wanted everyone to believe had been wounded. "Don't let her divide us." The words were gentle. But the poison underneath them spread quickly. Grace lifted her eyes. Vanessa looked at her for only half a second, then looked back at Charles as if she were afraid to be near her. "She knows exactly what she's doing," Vanessa said. "She waited until guests were here. She waited until the house was full. She wanted to embarrass me in front of people who matter to us." Charles's jaw tightened. "To us," he repeated. Vanessa took another step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make the room lean in. "Yes. To us. Our friends, our future. Our name." Then she looked around the lobby. Not at the staff. At the guests. At anyone with money, status, and influence. "You all saw it," she said, her voice breaking at just the right place. "I asked her to do her job. That is all. I was preparing this house for an engagement luncheon, for a beautiful day for Charles, and she turned it into this." She gestured weakly toward Grace. As if Grace herself were the mess, the insult, the stain on the marble. Grace's face stayed calm, but something moved behind her eyes. A flash of pain, not because Vanessa's lie was clever. Because it was familiar. People like Vanessa always knew how to make kindness look rude. How to make silence look guilty. How to make dignity look rebellion. Charles looked at Grace, then back at Vanessa. She said, "You threatened to have her fired." Vanessa gave a soft, wounded laugh. "Because she was disrespectful." She said, "You spoke about her mother." Vanessa's lips parted. For one brief moment, the tears stopped. Then she recovered. "I was upset. I said things. People say things when they are being attacked." Grace finally spoke. "I did not attack you." Vanessa turned on her and the mask cracked. "Do not interrupt me." There it was. The real voice. Sharp, cold, commanding. The room heard it. Charles heard it too. Vanessa realized her mistake a second too late. She turned back to him immediately, eyes wide, voice trembling again. "You see, she keeps doing it. She keeps pushing me." Charles said nothing. That silence frightened her. So she pushed harder. "She has been strange since the day she arrived," Vanessa said. "Too quiet. Too watchful. Always listening, always appearing in hallways. I told you weeks ago something about her felt wrong." Grace looked down then. Only once. Because that part was not entirely false. She had been quiet. She had been watchful. She had listened. But not to steal. Not to scheme. She had listened the way a person listens when she is trying to understand why her mother's last secret led her to this house. Charles noticed the change in Grace's face. Vanessa noticed him noticing. So she rushed in. "And now look," Vanessa said. "You are taking her into the library like she is some honored guest. You are asking questions as if I am the one on trial." Charles's voice was low. "Maybe I should have asked questions sooner." Vanessa froze. The sentence did not shout. It landed. Hard. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the man who used to smooth over every uncomfortable moment with a smile, a check, or a promise. The man who hated conflict so much he would rather believe the easiest version of a person than dig for the truth. But that man was not standing there now. Something had shifted inside Charles when he saw Grace facing humiliation without bending. Something old had woken up. Something he did not understand yet but could no longer ignore. Vanessa turned toward the guests again. Her voice lifted. "Do you hear this? I am being accused in my own engagement celebration." The woman in pearls answered quietly. "It has not started yet." Vanessa's head snapped toward her. "What?" "The engagement celebration," the older woman said. "It has not started yet." A few people looked down. Not smiling. Not laughing. But the meaning was clear. Nothing was official. Not the luncheon. Not the future. Not Vanessa's place in that house. Vanessa's face went pale with fury. Then she did what desperate people do when charm stops working. She reached for fear. "Charles," she said, turning back to him, "think carefully. Think about what this looks like. A wealthy man alone in a library with a female employee after a public scene. People talk. They always talk. The room chilled. Grace stiffened. Charles's eyes narrowed. Vanessa's tears kept falling but her voice sharpened beneath them. I am only trying to protect you, she whispered. Protect us. No, Charles said. One word. Flat. Final. Vanessa blinked. You are trying to control what happens next. The chandelier hummed softly above them. Somewhere in the garden a guest laughed nervously, unaware of how far the damage had spread inside the house. Grace stood so still she seemed carved into the room. Charles took one step toward Vanessa. For weeks I thought your tension with the staff was wedding stress. I thought your complaints were harmless. I thought you were adjusting to this house. His voice tightened. But this is not adjustment. He looked toward the dropped white rose on the marble floor. This is cruelty. Vanessa recoiled as if he had struck her. Cruelty, she whispered. Yes. I have given everything to this relationship. You have not given kindness. That sentence broke something. Not in Grace. In Vanessa. Her tears turned real for the first time, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage. Her nostrils flared. Her mouth tightened. The softness drained from her body. So that is it, she said. A cleaner says a few sad words and suddenly I am the villain. Charles did not answer. Grace did. No one made you the villain, Miss Hart. Vanessa turned slowly. Grace's voice remained gentle. You chose how to speak. Vanessa stared at her with open hatred. And in that hatred everyone saw the truth more clearly than before. The performance was over. The victim had disappeared. What remained was the woman Grace had faced before Charles walked in. The woman who believed a uniform made a person less human. The woman who thought money could erase dignity. The woman who had mistaken silence for weakness. Charles reached for the library door again. Grace, he said, please come in. Vanessa stepped forward. No. Charles looked back. Her voice shook. But not from pain anymore. From panic. You are not taking her in there. Not without me? Charles studied her. Why? Vanessa had no answer fast enough. That was the problem with lies. They ran beautifully in straight lines but they stumbled when the road turned. Because I am your fiancé, she said at last. Charles looked at her hand. At the ring glittering there. Then at Grace. Then at the guests. I know. Vanessa breathed out almost relieved. But Charles was not finished. And that is exactly why I need to know who you really are before you become my wife. The words hit the room like glass breaking. Vanessa's face collapsed. Grace lowered her eyes. The woman in pearls made the sign of the cross under her breath. Charles opened the library door. Warm light spilled from inside onto the marble floor. Grace took one step toward it. Behind her, Vanessa whispered so low only the closest people heard it. You will regret this. Grace stopped. Not because she was afraid. Because she wanted Vanessa to hear her clearly. She turned. No, Grace said softly. I already regret staying silent for so long. Then she walked into the library. Charles followed. The door closed behind them with a clean, heavy click. And Vanessa Hart was left standing in the lobby surrounded by witnesses, expensive flowers, and the first true silence of her life. The library door closed behind them with a heavy click. Outside, Vanessa Hart stood in the lobby with her tears drying on her face. Inside, the room was still. The Whitmore Library was nothing like the marble lobby. It did not shine. It watched. Dark wooden shelves climbed all the way to the ceiling. Old law books lined one wall, family portraits hung on another, their painted eyes fixed on the room like silent judges. Grace Miller stood near the center of the carpet, hands folded in front of her. Charles Whitmore did not sit. Not yet. He walked to the window and looked out toward the garden where guests were pretending not to whisper. From here, he could see small groups gathered beneath white umbrellas. He could see heads turning toward the house. He could see the luncheon he had planned becoming something else. Something he could no longer control. For years Charles had been trained to control everything. Companies, contracts, meetings, public image, family reputation. But one quiet woman in a cleaner's uniform had just shown him that the most important things in a house could happen while the owner was not paying attention. He turned back. Miss Miller, he said, his voice low, I need to understand what happened. Grace nodded. Yes, sir. Charles looked at the chair across from his desk. Please sit. Grace did not move. He noticed. Then he understood. For 7 months she had been told where to stand, where to walk, when to enter, when to leave. Sitting in front of him as a person, not an employee, being corrected was not a small thing. He softened his voice. You are not in trouble. Grace looked at him. That sentence did not enter easily. People like Grace did not trust safety just because it was offered. Not after too many doors had been closed. Not after too many smiles had hidden knives. Charles gestured again. Please? Slowly Grace sat. Not fully at ease. Not relaxed. Her back stayed straight. Her hands remained folded, but she sat. Charles stayed standing for another second, then sat across from her, not behind the desk. He chose the chair beside it, leaving no polished barrier between them. That choice mattered. Grace saw it. She said nothing. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of a small brass clock on the shelf. Then Charles spoke. I should have asked sooner. Grace looked up. Sir. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I should have asked how the staff was being treated. I should have noticed the way people went quiet when Vanessa entered a room. I should have questioned why employees who had worked here for years suddenly looked afraid in their own workplace. Grace's lips pressed together. She had not expected this. An apology in the lobby was one thing. A wealthy man could apologize in public and still do nothing in private. But this was different. There was no audience now, no guest to impress, no performance to protect. Only the truth. Charles rubbed one hand over his face. I trusted the wrong silence. Grace's eyes flickered. He caught it. What? He asked gently. She hesitated. Then she said, silence is not always peace, Mr. Whitmore. The sentence entered him slowly. Silence is not always peace. He looked around the library, at the shelves, at the portraits, at the old leather furniture that had belonged to his father. This house had been silent for a long time, polished, organized, respectful, but now he wondered how much pain had been hidden inside that silence. Grace continued carefully. Some people are silent because they are calm. Some are silent because they are afraid of losing the little they have. Charles lowered his eyes. And you? Grace breathed in. I was silent because I needed the work. The honesty in that answer hurt more than accusation. Charles nodded once. I understand. Grace looked at him with a quiet sadness. No, sir. I do not think you do. He froze. Not because she was wrong. Because she was brave enough to say it. Grace's voice remained respectful but steady. You are a good man, maybe. I do not know. But when someone like me loses work, it is not inconvenience. It is rent, medicine, food, bus fare. It is whether the lights stay on. It is whether a landlord opens the door or turns his back. Charles held her gaze. Grace went on. So when Miss Hart spoke to me that way, I swallowed it. The first time. Then the second. Then every time after that. Her hands tightened together. I told myself I could carry it. The clock ticked. Once. Twice. But today she said she spoke about my mother. Charles's face changed. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Grace looked toward the window, but she was not seeing the garden. She was somewhere else now. Somewhere poorer. Smaller. Warmer. Somewhere with tired hands and a mother's voice. My mother worked her whole life, Grace said. She cleaned homes. Offices. Churches. Anywhere that paid. She never owned much, but she kept one thing carefully. Charles waited. Grace turned back to him. Her dignity. The word filled the room. Not loudly. Deeply. She used to tell me, Grace, people may see the work before they see the woman. But God sees the woman first. Charles swallowed. Grace's eyes shone, but she did not cry. When Miss Hart spoke about her like she was nothing, I heard every insult my mother ever endured. Every door closed in her face. Every person who looked past her like she was furniture. She paused. And I could not stay silent anymore. Charles leaned back slowly. The weight of it settled over him. Out in the lobby, Vanessa had tried to make this about disrespect. About social order. About a worker who had forgotten her place. But inside this room the truth was clearer. Grace had not rebelled. She had endured until endurance became betrayal. Charles stood. For one frightening second, Grace thought he was ending the conversation. Instead he walked to the door. He opened it. Outside the hallway stood empty, but the murmur of the lobby carried faintly through the house. Charles turned back to her. I am not dismissing you. Grace blinked. I am not asking you to apologize, he continued. And I am not going to let Vanessa decide what is true simply because she speaks louder. Grace stared at him. Something in her face shifted, very small, almost invisible. Not relief. Not yet. Maybe the first edge of it? Charles closed the door again but left his hand on the handle. When we leave this room, I will speak to the guests and I will speak to the staff. I want the truth from everyone who saw what happened. No one will be punished for telling it. Grace's voice was barely above a whisper. People may still be afraid. I know. Miss Hart has influence. Charles's jaw tightened. Not in this house. Not anymore. That sentence changed the air. Grace looked down at her hands. For 7 months she had entered this mansion through the service door. She had kept her eyes low, her voice soft, her pain folded away like the cloth she carried from room to room. Now the man who owned the house was telling her that the woman who humiliated her would not own the truth. Charles walked back to his chair but did not sit. "There is something else," he said. Grace looked up. He hesitated. For the first time Charles Whitmore looked unsure, not wealthy, not powerful. Just a man standing at the edge of what he did not want to know. "When you spoke in the lobby," he said, "when you said there was a place inside you that belonged to your mother and to God." He stopped. Grace waited. Charles's voice dropped. "It reminded me of something my father used to say." Grace's expression changed. A small crack in her composure. Charles saw it. "Miss Miller," he said carefully, "why did you come to work in this house?" The question hung between them. Grace did not answer right away. Her hand moved slowly toward the pocket of her uniform, then stopped. Charles noticed. This was no longer only about Vanessa. It had never been only about Vanessa. Before either of them could speak again, there was a knock on the library door. Sharp. Impatient. "Vanessa." Her voice came through the wood. "Charles, this has gone far enough." Charles did not move. Grace looked toward the door. The old fear tried to return to her face. Charles saw it and stepped between her and the sound. Then he opened the door. Vanessa stood there, eyes red, chin lifted, diamonds flashing at her throat like little pieces of ice. Behind her several guests and staff had gathered at a distance drawn by the storm. They could not stop watching. Charles looked past Vanessa to the room beyond. Then he said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Before anyone is judged in this house today, we are going to hear the truth." Vanessa's face stiffened. "You cannot be serious." Charles held her gaze. "I am." And in that moment Grace understood something. For the first time since she had entered the Whitmore estate, the loudest voice was no longer winning. The truth had been given a chair. And Charles Whitmore had finally decided to sit beside it. Vanessa Hart stood in the library doorway like a woman guarding a throne. Behind her, the hallway had filled with quiet faces. Guests. Staff. People who had spent the last 15 minutes pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Charles Whitmore did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "We are going to hear the truth," he said again. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward Grace Miller. For one brief second all the softness disappeared. There was no wounded fiancé now, no trembling victim. Only rage. Then Vanessa turned back to Charles and forced a broken smile. "The truth," she whispered. "Fine. Ask her why she thinks she has the right to speak to me that way." Charles looked over his shoulder. Grace was still seated near the desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The library light touched the side of her face, catching the moisture in her eyes. She looked smaller in the chair than she had looked in the lobby. But not weaker. Charles stepped aside. "Grace," he said gently, "you do not have to stand." That simple sentence moved through the room. You do not have to stand. For 7 months Grace had stood in corners, stood beside tables, stood near doors, stood waiting for orders, stood invisible, while others lived comfortably around her. Now the owner of the house was telling her she could remain seated. As a person. As a witness. As someone whose words mattered. Grace looked up at him surprised. Then she nodded once. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Grace took a slow breath. "I did not insult Miss Hart," she began. Her voice was quiet, but the hallway had gone so still everyone heard her. "I told her I had already cleaned the hallway. She did not believe me. She called me the help. She told me people like me do not answer back." Vanessa scoffed. "People like you," she said. "I never said." The young man with the notebook lifted his head. "Yes, you did?" Every eye turned to him. He was standing near the back, half hidden behind a tall plant, as if he regretted being noticed. He looked young, maybe 25, with a tie that had loosened during the tension and a notebook clutched to his chest. Vanessa glared at him. "Excuse me?" He swallowed. "I wrote it down." The hallway shifted. Charles looked at the young man. "Your name?" "Ethan Brooks, sir. I was hired to document the engagement luncheon details." His voice shook, but he opened the notebook. At 11:42 Miss Hart said, "You are the help." The help does not answer back. Vanessa's face went pale. "That is ridiculous. You were not hired to spy on me." "No ma'am," Ethan said. "I was hired to write things down." A low breath moved through the hallway. Not laughter. Something heavier. Recognition. Charles turned back to Grace. "Continue." Grace lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted them again. "She threatened my job. She said one word from her would close every door in the city. Then she spoke about my mother." Her voice changed on that last word. Not louder. Deeper. Charles felt it like a hand pressing against his chest. "What did you say then?" he asked. Grace looked at Vanessa. "I asked her not to speak about my mother." Vanessa folded her arms. "You made a scene." Grace shook her head slowly. "No. I made a boundary." The words landed cleanly. Even Vanessa seemed startled by them. Grace continued. My mother taught me that a person can work in someone's house without giving them ownership of her soul. She told me that if I ever had to choose between keeping peace and keeping the truth, I should choose the truth and accept the cost. Charles watched her closely. There it was again. That strange pull in his chest. The way she spoke about her mother. The way she held sorrow without letting it spill everywhere. The way she refused to turn pain into cruelty. For 7 months he had passed her in the halls and known almost nothing about her. He remembered her carrying fresh linens up the east staircase. He remembered her setting flowers in the breakfast room. He remembered once months ago finding the music room open at dawn. Grace had been inside dusting the old piano with such careful hands that she seemed to be touching something sacred. When he entered, she stepped away, quickly apologized and left. He had not thought about it again. Until now. Now every small memory returned with weight. Grace Miller had always been there. He had simply failed to see her. Vanessa sensed him drifting toward Grace's truth and panic sharpened her voice. Charles listened to how she talks. Like she is delivering some grand speech. She knows exactly what she is doing. Charles did not look at her. Maybe she knows exactly who she is. Grace's eyes moved to him. The sentence surprised her. It surprised him too. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. Who she is? She is an employee. Charles finally turned. She is also a woman standing in my house telling the truth. Vanessa's lips parted. Nothing came. Charles looked back at Grace. Did you lie to me today? No, sir. Did you exaggerate? No. Did you threaten Miss Hart? No. If I dismiss you for this, what happens to you? Grace's face tightened. The question was too real. Vanessa looked relieved. She thought Charles had found the practical point. The pressure point. The reason Grace would bend. Grace looked down at her hands. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she answered. I would look for another job. Charles waited. Grace swallowed. I would probably not find one quickly if Miss Hart made the call she threatened to make. I would fall behind on rent. I would sell what little I have. I would make the food last longer. The hallway went silent in a different way now. This was not dramatic silence. This was ashamed silence. Grace's voice remained steady. But I would still not lie. Charles stared at her. That was the moment it happened. Not in a loud cinematic burst. Not with thunder. Not with a swelling orchestra. It happened quietly. Something in Charles Whitmore broke open. All his life he had been surrounded by people who shaped the truth depending on what it could buy them. Lawyers softened it. Executives stretched it. Friends avoided it. Vanessa decorated it until it became something else entirely. But Grace Miller sat in his library, facing the possibility of losing everything, and told the truth without dressing it up. She did not beg. She did not flatter him. She did not try to make him hate Vanessa. She simply told him what happened. And that honesty made Charles feel ashamed of how little he had asked from the people closest to him. He lowered his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Thank you. Grace blinked. For what, sir? For not lying to me? No one moved. Vanessa stared at him as if he had gone mad. Grace looked at Charles with confusion first, then something softer, something almost painful. You do not have to thank me for that. Yet, Charles said. I do. He stood straighter and looked toward the hallway. I want everyone here to understand something. No one in this house will lose their position for telling the truth today. No one will be threatened. No one will be punished for speaking honestly. Several staff members exchanged looks. The waiter from the lobby slowly lifted his eyes. An older maid near the staircase pressed a hand over her mouth. Charles continued. If Miss Hart has mistreated anyone else, I want to know. Not later. Not after rumors. Now. Vanessa stepped into the library. Stop this immediately. Charles held up one hand. The same way Grace had done in the lobby. Open palm. Calm. Final. Vanessa froze. The gesture was unmistakable. Grace saw it. So did everyone else. For the first time, Charles was not just defending Grace. He was learning from her. Your voice does not decide what happens here, Charles said. Vanessa's face drained of color. That sentence traveled through the room like a judgment. Grace's breath caught softly. Charles turned to her again. I am sorry I did not see you before today. Grace looked down. It is easy not to see people who are working, she said. No, Charles said. It is common. That does not make it easy to forgive. Grace's lips trembled. Only slightly. Then she gave the smallest nod. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But acknowledgement. Charles looked at her for a long moment. In her quiet face he saw courage without pride, pain without bitterness, and honesty without protection. She had every reason to lie. She had chosen not to. And because of that, he could no longer return to the man who had walked into the lobby carrying flowers. He turned back to Vanessa. Until I understand everything that has happened in this house, he said. The engagement luncheon is over. A gasp moved through the hallway. Vanessa staggered back half a step. You cannot do that. I just did. The guests are here. They can leave. My family is expecting an announcement. They will not get one today. Vanessa's eyes filled again, but this time no one believed the tears. Not fully. Not anymore. Grace stood slowly from the chair. Charles turned toward her. You do not have to go back to work today. Grace folded the cloth once carefully, as if her hands needed something ordinary to hold. I would like to finish what I started, she said. Charles studied her. Then nodded. Only if you choose to. Grace looked toward the hallway, toward the faces watching her differently now. Then she looked at Vanessa. Not with anger. With sadness. I choose to finish my work, she said. But I will not finish it as someone beneath you. No one spoke. Grace walked toward the door. People stepped aside for her. Not because she carried a tray. Not because they wanted service. Because she had earned space. As she passed into the hallway, Charles watched her go. And for the first time in 7 months, Grace Miller was not a shadow moving through the Whitmore estate. She was the reason the whole house had begun telling the truth. Grace Miller stepped back into the hallway, and the house stepped aside for her. That was the first thing Harold Bennett noticed. For 30 years Harold had served the Whitmore family. He had opened these doors for governors, judges, bankers, and men who believed their signatures could move the earth. He had carried trays through parties where people laughed too loudly and apologized too little. He had watched children become heirs, heirs become strangers, and strangers become family when money needed them to be. But he had never seen the staff step aside for a cleaner the way they did for Grace. Not out of fear. Out of respect. Harold stood near the end of the corridor, half hidden beside the tall cabinet of old china. His silver hair was combed neatly back. His black suit was pressed. His hands folded in front of him looked calm, but inside something old was shaking. Grace walked past him with the folded cloth still in her hand. She did not see him at first. Her eyes were lowered, but not in the way they had been before. There was no shame in her posture now. There was pain, yes. Exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that comes after standing up when every part of you wants to sit down and disappear. But there was no shame. That frightened Harold more than Vanessa Hart's cruelty ever had. Because Grace's dignity was not new. It had been hidden. And Harold had seen it before. Years ago. In another woman. In another hallway. Before the Whitmore estate learned how to bury its secrets under polished floors and fresh flowers. Miss Miller, Harold said softly. Grace stopped. She turned. Mr. Bennett? Her voice was polite. Respectful. Still careful. Charles Whitmore stood several feet behind her at the library door, watching the hallway with a look Harold had not seen on him since he was a boy. Uncertain. Wounded. Awake. Vanessa Hart remained near the lobby, surrounded by guests who no longer knew where to place their eyes. The engagement luncheon was dead, though no one had officially said so. The white orchid still rested on the chair. The fallen rose still lay on the marble. Everything beautiful in the house now looked like evidence. Harold looked at Grace for one long second. Then he saw it again. The curve of her mouth when she held back emotion. The way she stood straight even when threatened. The way she carried silence like a promise instead of a weakness. His breath caught. No, not now. Not after all these years. Grace tilted her head slightly. Are you all right, Mr. Bennett? The question nearly broke him. She was the one who had been humiliated. She was the one who had been threatened. And still she asked if he was all right. Harold forced his hands to remain folded. Yes, he said. Forgive me, I only wanted to ask if you needed anything. Grace's face softened. No, thank you. She turned to continue down the hallway, but before she could take another step, Charles spoke. Harold. The old housekeeper looked up. Charles's eyes were on him now. Sharp. Searching. You have been here longer than anyone, Charles said. You saw what happened today. Harold nodded. I saw enough, sir. Has this happened before? The hallway tightened. Several staff members lowered their eyes. A young maid near the staircase pressed her fingers together so hard her knuckles whitened. The waiter from the lobby stared at the carpet. Harold looked at them. He knew their fear. He had lived inside that kind of fear for decades. Not fear of being shouted at. That was simple. That passed. This was fear of consequences. Fear of losing work. Fear of rich people remembering your name for the wrong reason. Fear of truth arriving too late to save you. Charles waited. Harold swallowed. Yes, sir, he said at last. It has happened before. Vanessa's head snapped toward him. You old fool. The words came out before she could soften them. There was the real Vanessa again. Not trembling. Not wounded. Just grill. The guest heard it. Charles heard it. Grace heard it. Harold did not flinch. He had been called worse by better people. Charles's face hardened. Do not speak to him that way. Vanessa gave a sharp laugh. So now the servants are running the house. No, Charles said. The truth is. The sentence settled into the hallway. Harold felt it in his chest. The truth. For years he had kept one part of that truth locked away, literally locked away. In a small leather notebook inside the bottom drawer of his bedside table. A notebook with names, dates, and one final instruction written by Charles's father before he died. Do not speak until she comes. At the time Harold had not understood. Now Grace Miller stood before him, and every hidden thing in the Whitmore estate seemed to lean toward her. Charles noticed Harold's face. What is it? He asked. Harold looked down. Nothing, sir. But the lie was old and tired and it could not stand in that hallway anymore. Grace looked at him quietly. Not accusing. Just seeing? That was worse. Harold's throat tightened. There are things in this house, he said slowly, that should have been spoken of years ago. Charles became still. What things? Vanessa stepped forward. Charles, this is absurd. You are turning one employee's attitude problem into a family investigation. Harold's eyes lifted to hers. For the first time that day he allowed himself to look at Vanessa Hart without the mask of service. Madam, he said, you know nothing about this family. Vanessa recoiled. The words were not loud. But they had history behind them. Charles took one step closer. Harold. What are you talking about? The old housekeeper looked at Grace again. A strange sadness moved across his face. Grace felt it. A cold thread of unease passed through her. Mr. Bennett, she said carefully, why are you looking at me like that? Harold tried to answer. He could not. Because suddenly he was not in the hallway anymore. He was 20 years younger, standing beside a closed bedroom door while a woman cried inside. He was holding a message he had been ordered not to deliver. He was watching Charles's father sit alone in this very house, face buried in his hands, whispering a name that no one else was allowed to say. A name connected to a woman who had vanished. A woman with proud eyes. A woman who cleaned rooms with cracked hands and carried herself like a queen no one had crowned. Harold heard her voice, now faint as a memory. Promise me he will know one day. He had promised. Then fear, loyalty, and the weight of the Whitmore name had buried the promise alive. Until Grace. Until today. Charles's voice cut through the memory. Harold. The old man blinked. Yes, sir. What secret are you keeping? The hallway went silent. Even Vanessa did not speak. Harold looked toward the lobby, toward the fallen rose on the marble, toward the orchids that had been meant for a celebration and had become flowers at the funeral of a lie. Then he looked back at Charles. I need my notebook. Charles stared at him. What notebook? Harold's voice trembled now. The one your father made me keep. Grace's breath caught. She did not know why. But the word struck something deep inside her, as if a locked door had been touched from the other side. Vanessa stepped back. For the first time she looked truly afraid. Not angry. Afraid. Charles saw it. So did Harold. So did Grace. That fear was its own confession. Charles turned fully toward Harold. Where is it? In my room, sir. Locked away. Get it. Harold did not move. Charles's voice softened. Please. That word did it. Please. Not an order. A request. From the boy Harold had once carried through these halls. From the man now standing on the edge of a truth his own house had hidden from him. Harold nodded slowly. Yes, sir. He turned and began walking down the corridor. Every step felt heavier than the last. The staff parted for him now, just as they had parted for Grace. The old house seemed to groan around them. Floorboards whispered. The clock ticked in the lobby. Somewhere outside the wind pushed lightly against the windows. Grace stood frozen. Charles looked at her. Do you know what this is about? Grace shook her head. No. But her hand had moved to the pocket of her uniform. The pocket where she kept the one thing her mother had left her. A small sealed envelope. Old, soft at the edges. Never opened. Her mother had told her only one thing before she died. When the right house recognizes you, you will know. Grace had thought those words were grief talking. Now Harold Bennett was walking toward a locked room to bring back a notebook from Charles Whitmore's dead father. And Vanessa Hart, who had been so loud all afternoon, had gone silent. Charles noticed Grace's hand at her pocket. What is that? He asked. Grace looked down. Her fingers closed around the envelope through the fabric. I don't know yet, she whispered. From the far end of the hallway, Harold disappeared around the corner. No one followed. No one breathed. Because every person in that house felt it now. The scene in the lobby had not started with Vanessa's cruelty. It had only uncovered the first layer. Grace Miller had not come to the Whitmore estate by accident. The house had been waiting for her. And somewhere behind a locked drawer an old truth was finally preparing to speak. Grace Miller had carried the envelope for 11 years. Not in the same pocket. Not in the same coat. But always close. Through cheap apartments, through bus rides before sunrise, through winters when the heater stopped working, through nights when she sat alone at a kitchen table and wondered if grief could become a permanent address. The envelope had survived everything. Its edges were soft now. The paper had yellowed. One corner had a tiny water stain from the night Grace cried so hard she forgot she was holding it. But she had never opened it. Not once. Because her mother had made her promise. Now standing in the hallway of the Whitmore estate with Charles Whitmore watching her and Vanessa Hart silent for the first time all afternoon, Grace felt the envelope burning through the fabric of her uniform pocket. Charles noticed. "Grace," he said carefully, "what are you holding?" Grace looked toward the end of the hallway where Harold Bennett had disappeared. Then she looked back at Charles. "My mother left me something." Vanessa's eyes sharpened. Charles took one slow step toward her. "What kind of something?" Grace did not answer right away. Her fingers slipped into her pocket and closed around the envelope. For a moment she was no longer in the Whitmore estate. She was back in a small room with dim light, an old fan turning slowly above a narrow bed, and her mother lying beneath a faded blanket thinner than Grace had ever seen her. Her mother's name had been Elena Miller. She had worked until the sickness made her hands too weak to hold a mop. Even then she had apologized for the floors she could no longer clean. She had been that kind of woman, proud, gentle, and tired in places no doctor could touch. On her last night Elena had called Grace close. "Baby," she whispered. Grace had taken her hand. It felt like paper and warmth. "I need you to keep this." Elena had pulled the envelope from beneath her pillow. Her fingers trembled so badly Grace had to help her hold it. "Do not open it just because you are curious," Elena said. "Do not open it because you are angry. Do not open it because you are lonely." Grace remembered the sound of her mother's breathing. Short. Uneven. Fighting. "When the right house recognizes you," Elena whispered, "you will know." Grace had cried then. "Mama, what does that mean?" Elena's eyes filled, but she smiled. A small broken smile. "It means the truth has its own timing." Then after a long silence her mother had spoken one final word that had never left Grace's mind. Forgiveness? Not revenge. Not money. Not justice. Forgiveness. A word too heavy for a dying woman to waste. Back in the hallway Grace pulled the envelope out. The air changed immediately. Even the guests at the far end seemed to feel it, though they could not see what she held. Charles stared at the old paper. Vanessa stared harder. Grace turned the envelope over in her hands. There was no address on the front. Only her mother's handwriting across the flap. "For the one who is ready to hear the truth." Charles read the words silently. His face tightened. "Your mother wrote that?" Grace nodded. "Yes." "When?" "Before she died." Charles looked from the envelope to Grace. "And she told you to bring it here?" Grace shook her head. "No, she never said the name of this house." "Then why did you come?" Grace looked down. This was the part she had never explained to anyone. "After she died, I found a second note in her Bible," Grace said. Only 2 words were written there. Charles waited. Grace lifted her eyes. Whitmore Estate. The hallway seemed to tilt. Charles did not speak. Vanessa did. "That proves nothing." Her voice was quick. Too quick. Everyone turned toward her. Vanessa realized the mistake and softened her face at once. "I mean," she said, "grief can make people imagine connections. A dying woman writes a name and suddenly we are treating it like some great mystery." Grace looked at her calm but wounded. "My mother did not imagine things." Vanessa's mouth tightened. Charles did not take his eyes off the envelope. "Did she ever work here?" Grace shook her head. "I don't know." Harold's voice came from the far end of the hallway. "She did." Everyone turned. The old housekeeper was walking back slowly carrying a small leather notebook in both hands. He held it like something sacred. Or dangerous. His face looked older than it had 10 minutes earlier. Grace could not move. Charles looked at Harold. "What did you say?" Harold stopped a few feet away. "Elena Miller worked in this house many years ago." Grace's lips parted. The name struck her harder than any insult Vanessa had thrown. "My mother." Harold nodded, eyes wet. "Yes, Miss Miller. Your mother." Grace stepped back as if the floor had shifted under her. "No," she whispered. "She would have told me." Harold's voice broke. "She wanted to." Charles looked between them. Harold explained. The old housekeeper swallowed. "I cannot explain all of it in the hallway, sir. Not properly." Vanessa moved quickly. "Exactly. This is becoming shameful. Guests are still here. This can wait." "No," Grace said. The word surprised everyone, including herself. She looked at Harold, then Charles. "No. It cannot wait." Her hand tightened around the envelope. "My mother carried something to her grave." I have carried it since. If this house knows her name, then I deserve to know why. Charles nodded. You do? Vanessa's eyes flashed. Charles. He turned toward her. Enough. Just one word. But it shut the room. Harold looked down at the notebook. There is a page marked, he said. Your father marked it, sir. He told me never to remove it. Never to destroy it. Charles's voice was almost a whisper. My father. Yes. Harold opened the notebook with trembling fingers. A dried white ribbon marked one page. The ribbon was so old it had turned cream-colored at the edges. Grace watched as if watching a grave being opened. Harold looked at Charles. May I? Charles nodded. Harold, read. Elena Miller entered service at Whitmore Estate on April 3rd. Quiet. Skilled. Refused favors. Spoke little. Carried sorrow with dignity. Grace's eyes filled instantly. That sounded like her mother. Not the facts. The soul of it. Harold continued, his voice shaking. Mr. Thomas Whitmore requested all records concerning Miss Miller be held privately after her departure. No discussion among staff. No forwarding address disclosed. Charles frowned. Why would my father do that? Harold looked at Grace. Then at the envelope. Because there was a child involved. The hallway went cold. Grace stopped breathing. Charles did too. Vanessa's face turned white. A child, Charles asked. Harold nodded slowly. I do not know everything. I was not told everything. But your father wrote that Miss Miller left this house carrying more than her suitcase. He wrote that one day someone might come back with her eyes. Grace raised one hand to her mouth. Her mother's eyes. People had said Grace had them all her life. Deep brown. Steady. Sad even when she smiled. Charles stared at her as if seeing those eyes for the first time. Grace looked at the envelope. Her fingers trembled now. For the first time all day they truly trembled. My mother told me not to open this until the right house recognized me, she whispered. Harold's tears spilled over. This house recognizes you, Miss Miller. No one spoke. Not the guests. Not the staff. Not Vanessa. Grace stared at the handwriting on the envelope flap. For the one who is ready to hear the truth. Her whole life seemed to narrow down to that line. Charles took a step closer then stopped. He did not touch the envelope. He did not ask to see it. He simply said, only you can decide. That mattered. After a day of being ordered, threatened and judged, someone finally left the choice in her hands. Grace looked at him. Then at Harold. Then down the hallway where the fallen rose still lay on the marble floor like a small white witness. She broke the seal. The sound was tiny. Paper tearing. But in that house it sounded like thunder. Inside was a single folded letter. Grace opened it carefully. Her mother's handwriting filled the page. The first line made Grace's knees weaken. My dearest Grace, if you are reading this inside the Whitmore house, then the past has finally found the courage to face you. Grace pressed one hand to the wall. Charles moved instinctively, but she held up her palm. Not to reject him. To steady the world. She kept reading silently. Her lips trembled. A tear fell onto the page. Then another. Charles could barely breathe. What does it say? He asked softly. Grace looked up. Her face had changed. The woman who had entered the mansion as a cleaner was gone. Or maybe she had never been, only that. My mother says she came here when she was young, Grace whispered. She says she loved someone in this house? Harold closed his eyes. Charles went still. Grace looked at the next line. Her voice broke. She says she left because staying would have destroyed him. Vanessa suddenly stepped backward. No one missed it. Grace kept reading each word, pulling the room deeper into the past. She says she forgave him before she died. Her eyes lifted to Charles. And she asks me to do the one thing she could not do. Charles's voice was barely there. What? Grace held the letter against her chest. To find out what really happened, Grace held the letter against her chest as if it were the last warm thing left in the room. No one spoke. Not Charles Whitmore. Not Harold Bennett. Not the guests gathered at the edge of the hallway. Even Vanessa Hart had gone quiet, and that silence was more frightening than her anger. Grace looked down at the letter again. Her mother's handwriting moved across the page in careful lines, each one written by a woman who had known she was running out of time. My mother says there was a child, Grace whispered. Charles did not move. But something in his face changed. A small tightening near the eyes. A man bracing himself before a door opens. Grace swallowed hard. She says the child was not allowed to stay with her. Harold closed his eyes. The leather notebook trembled in his hands. Charles looked at him. Harold. The old housekeeper did not answer. Grace kept reading. She says his name was Aaron. The name passed through the hallway like a match struck in the dark. Aaron. Charles's breath stopped. Not because he remembered the man. Because he remembered the name, a name hidden in corners of his childhood. A name never explained. A name he once saw carved on the back of an old wooden toy in the attic before a maid quickly took it from him and said it did not belong there. Aaron. Charles looked at Harold. My father had a brother. Harold's face crumpled. For the first time in 30 years, the old housekeeper looked less like a servant and more like a man crushed under a promise he had carried too long. No, sir, Harold said. His voice broke. You had a brother. The hallway went still. Grace pressed one hand against the wall. Charles stared at Harold as if the room had dropped away beneath him. What did you say? Harold opened the notebook again, but he could barely see through the tears in his eyes. Your father wrote it himself. He did not write often. Only when something in the house needed to be remembered because the people inside it were trying too hard to forget. Vanessa stepped back. The movement was small. But Grace saw it. Charles saw it too. Harold read from the notebook. Child born in secrecy. Male. Given the name Aaron. Mother Elena Miller. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. The letter shook. My mother had a son. Harold nodded slowly. Yes. Grace's eyes filled. And she never told me. She tried to protect you. The words sounded weak the moment Harold said them. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Because protection and silence can look the same from the outside, but they do not feel the same to the person left in the dark. Grace's voice cracked. Protect me from what? Harold looked at Charles. From this house. Charles looked away. That answer landed in him like a judgment. This house. The Whitmore estate. Marble floors. Tall windows. White flowers. Family portraits. Wealth built high enough to block out shame. For years Charles had believed the house held history. Now he understood. It held evidence. Grace unfolded the letter fully, her eyes moving faster now, searching for the place where her mother had finally stopped hiding. She says Aaron was taken from her. Grace whispered. She says she was told it was better for everyone. Better for the family. Better for the boy. Her voice weakened on the last word. The boy? The woman in pearls began to cry quietly in the hallway. Charles stood frozen, his hands at his sides. Grace read on. She says she was given no real choice. She says she left the estate with an empty suitcase and a heart she could not feel anymore. Harold lowered his head. Charles turned to him sharply. Who did this? Harold did not answer fast enough. Who? Charles demanded. The old housekeeper looked at Vanessa for one brief second. Vanessa's face turned hard. Do not look at me, she snapped. I had nothing to do with whatever old tragedy this family buried before I ever arrived. Charles looked at her. Then why are you afraid? Vanessa blinked. I am not afraid. Yes, Grace said softly. Everyone turned toward her. Grace's eyes were still wet, but her voice had steadied. You are. Vanessa's mouth tightened. Grace looked back at the letter. My mother says the truth about Aaron was placed in the hands of someone who promised to keep it safe. Harold's body seemed to fold inward. She means me, he whispered. Charles stared at him. You knew I had a brother. Harold's tears fell freely now. I knew there was a child. I knew Miss Elena left broken. I knew your father regretted what happened until the day he died. But I did not know where the boy was taken. I swear that before God, sir, I did not know. Grace turned a page. There was something inside the fold. A small object slipped free and landed in her palm. A medal. Old. Dull with age. The hallway leaned toward it. Grace held it up. It was a small baptism medal, worn thin at the edges. On one side was a tiny cross. On the other, a name had been engraved by hand. Aaron. Beneath it was a date. Charles stepped closer without meaning to. His face went pale. I have seen that before. Grace looked at him. Where? Charles's voice was distant. In my father's study. Years ago. I was a child. He kept something like it in a locked drawer. I asked him what it was. He told me it belonged to someone he had failed. Harold covered his mouth. Grace looked at the medal again, and suddenly her mother's whole life looked different. Every quiet birthday. Every moment Elena stared at children in parks too long. Every time Grace asked why she had no family and her mother smiled with eyes full of pain. There had been a boy. A son. A brother. Aaron. Grace's knees weakened, but she did not fall. Charles reached toward her, then stopped himself. He had learned? Choice mattered. Grace, he said softly, may I? She looked at the medal. Then at him. After a moment, she placed it in his open hand. Charles held it like it might burn him. The medal was cold. Small. Real. Real in a way family rumors were not. Real in a way portraits were not. Real in a way wealth could not cover. He turned it over. Aaron. His brother's name sat in his palm. A brother he had never been allowed to know. A brother his father had mourned in secret. A brother connected to the cleaner standing in front of him with her mother's letter and her mother's eyes. Charles looked at Grace. What does the letter say about him now? Grace's lips parted but no sound came. She looked down again. Her face changed. Not shock this time. Fear. She does not know, Grace whispered. Charles took a breath. Grace read the line aloud. I searched for him until my body gave out. I found whispers, not answers. If you are reading this, Grace, then Aaron's name has returned to the house that tried to erase him. Do not let them erase him twice. The word struck the hallway like a bell. Do not let them erase him twice. Harold sobbed once quietly and turned away. Charles closed his hand around the metal. The old life inside him was collapsing piece by piece. The engagement luncheon. The future with Vanessa. The clean version of his family story, all of it breaking under the weight of one name. Aaron. Vanessa's voice returned thin and cold. This is touching, she said, but it proves nothing useful. A medal. A letter from a dying woman. An old man's notebook. You are all being swept away by emotion. Charles turned to her slowly. Useful. Vanessa realized too late what she had said. Grace stepped forward. To you, maybe my brother is not useful. The word brother caught in her throat. She said it again, steadier. My brother. Charles looked at her when she said it. Something passed between them then? Not trust. Not yet. Not family. That was too large, too sudden, too painful. But recognition. They were both standing in the wreckage of the same lie. Grace looked at Harold. Is there more in the notebook? Harold wiped his face with a trembling hand. Yes. Charles's voice was low. Read it. Harold turned the page, marked by the ribbon. His finger found the next entry. Mr. Thomas Whitmore ordered that all records related to the child be separated. One file remained under seal. He wrote that if Elena's daughter ever returned with the medal, the file must be opened in front of Charles. Vanessa took another step back. Charles saw it. Where is the file? Harold's voice shook. In the old safe behind your father's portrait. Charles looked toward the library. Toward the wall where the portrait hung. The house seemed to close around them. Grace clutched the letter. The medal rested in Charles's hand, and for the first time the name Aaron Whitmore was no longer a ghost. It was a key to the brother they had lost. A key to the mother Grace never fully knew. A key to the truth Vanessa suddenly wanted buried again. Charles turned toward the library door. Open the safe. Harold nodded. Grace took one step forward. This time Charles did not walk ahead of her. He waited. Then they entered the library together. Behind them, Vanessa stood in the hallway, pale and silent. Because the secret she feared was no longer hidden in memory. It had a name. And that name had just come home. The portrait of Thomas Whitmore watched them enter. It hung above the old fireplace in the library, taller than any living man in the room. Thomas stood in the painting with one hand resting on a carved desk, his face stern, his eyes dark, his shoulders squared beneath an expensive black suit. For years Charles had walked past that portrait without thinking. Now he could barely look at it. Harold Bennett crossed the room first, carrying the leather notebook as if every step might wake the dead. Grace Miller followed, her mother's letter pressed to her chest. Charles held the small baptism medal in his palm. Aaron. The name had weight now. A brother. A secret. A life removed from the family story, like a page torn out and hidden in a drawer. Vanessa Hart remained near the doorway. She had followed them in, but not too close. For the first time all day she looked careful. Not sad. Not angry. Careful. That was what Charles noticed. The woman who had cried in the lobby, shouted in the hallway, and played the victim in front of guests was now measuring every word before it left her mouth. Charles, she said softly, please think about what you're doing. He did not answer. Harold reached the portrait and placed one hand against the lower frame. His fingers trembled as he felt along the carved wood. I have not opened this in years, he whispered. Grace stood beside the desk, barely breathing. Charles looked at Vanessa. What are you afraid we'll find? Vanessa's eyes flashed. I am afraid you are being manipulated. By Grace. By all of this. She gestured toward the notebook, the letter, the medal. Old grief. Old guilt. A servant's memory. A dead woman's words. Grace flinched at that. Charles saw it. His face hardened. Do not speak about her mother like that. Vanessa's lips pressed together. Before she could answer, the portrait shifted. A soft click came from behind the frame. Harold pulled gently and the painting swung away from the wall on hidden hinges. Behind it sat an old steel safe. Small. Dark. Almost invisible against the wood paneling. The room went silent. Harold took a key from the inside pocket of his jacket. It was tied to a strip of faded cloth. His hands shook so badly he missed the lock the first time. Charles stepped closer. Harold. I'm sorry, sir. The old man tried again. This time the key turned. The safe opened with a dry metallic groan. Inside was one sealed file. Cream-colored. marked in Thomas Whitmore's handwriting. Aaron. Grace covered her mouth. Charles closed his eyes for 1 second. 1 second only. Then he opened them. Take it out. Harold removed the file and placed it on the desk. No one touched it at first. The file sat there like a living thing. Then Grace stepped forward. Open it, she whispered. Charles looked at her. You should be here when I do. I am here. He broke the seal. Inside were several documents. A birth record. A hospital form. A handwritten note. And a legal document with a notary stamp from years ago. Charles read the first page. His face drained of color. Grace watched his hands tighten. What she asked? Charles did not answer right away. He looked at Harold. Then at Vanessa. Then back at the page. This says Aaron was recognized privately by my father. Harold bowed his head. As his son, Grace asked. Charles swallowed. Yes. The words shattered something in the room. Grace pressed one hand to the desk. Her brother had not been a rumor. Not a mistake. Not a shameful whisper. He had been recognized. A real child. A Whitmore child. Charles turned the next page. His eyes moved quickly now. The file says arrangements were made for him to be placed under another family name. His voice tightened. There was supposed to be a trust. Harold looked up sharply. A trust. Charles nodded slowly. For Aaron. And for Elena. Grace's eyes filled. My mother never had a trust. No, Charles said, reading further. It was never delivered. Vanessa stepped toward the door. Just one step. Charles looked up. Stay. She froze. I need air. You need to stay. The words were quiet, but they pinned her to the room. Charles looked back at the file. There was another page beneath the trust document. Newer paper. Not as old as the others. His brow furrowed. This was added recently. Harold looked confused. Recently? Charles pulled it free. It was a copy of a draft will. His will? Or almost his will. Charles stared at it. What is that? Grace asked. Vanessa's face went white. Charles looked at her. Why is there a draft of my revised estate plan inside my father's sealed file? Vanessa said nothing. The room seemed to shrink around her. Charles read the document slowly. His voice became colder with every line. This version gives full temporary control of Whitmore Holdings to my spouse in the event of my medical incapacity or unexpected death. He turned the page. It also blocks any inheritance claim from previously undisclosed family members unless validated before the date of marriage. Grace looked at him. What does that mean? Charles looked at Vanessa. It means if I married her before Aaron was found, any claim connected to him could be buried. Vanessa's mask cracked. Only for a second. But everyone saw it. Harold whispered, Dear God. Charles held up another page. And this copy came from Nicholas Vale's office. Vanessa closed her eyes. Grace remembered the name from staff whispers. Nicholas Vale. Charles's cousin. Charming. Smiling. Always visiting when Charles was away. Always speaking to Vanessa in quiet corners. Charles stepped toward Vanessa. Tell me this is not what it looks like. Vanessa lifted her chin. There were no tears now. No soft voice. No wounded act. Only calculation. You do not understand what Nicholas was trying to prevent. Charles stared at her. Prevent? A scandal, she snapped. A disaster. Your father's illegitimate child, a missing heir, a housekeeper's daughter walking into the family estate at the worst possible time. Do you have any idea what that could do to the company? Grace went still. Charles's voice dropped. You knew. Vanessa said nothing. You knew about Aaron. I knew enough. The words came out like a confession with no remorse. Harold grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. Grace felt the room tilt again. You knew my mother's name. Vanessa looked at her, and for the first time she did not pretend kindness. Yes. Grace's breath caught. You knew why I came here. I suspected. And you treated me like that anyway. Vanessa laughed, once bitter and small. I treated you like what you were supposed to remain. Charles stepped between them. Stop. But Grace did not look away from Vanessa. Her voice was quiet. What was I supposed to remain? Vanessa's eyes hardened. Invisible. The word hit the room like a slap. Grace absorbed it. Then she straightened. Harold's eyes filled again, but Charles's face changed in a different way. Something cold and final moved through him. Nicholas gave you this? Charles asked, holding up the false will draft. Vanessa said nothing. Charles walked to the desk and picked up the phone. Vanessa's confidence faltered. What are you doing? Calling my attorney. Charles, do not be stupid. He looked at her. Careful. The single word stopped her. He dialed. The line rang once. Twice. Then Charles said, Martin, it's Charles. I need you at the estate immediately. Bring security. Bring the original estate documents. And pull every communication between Nicholas Vale and Vanessa Hart related to my will, my father's sealed files, and any trust connected to the name Aaron Whitmore. Vanessa stepped forward. You have no right. Charles continued into the phone. Yes? Today? He hung up. The room was silent again. But this silence was different. The truth was no longer hiding. It had names now. Aaron. Elena. Nicholas. Vanessa. Charles turned to Harold. Lock the file in my desk until Martin arrives. Harold nodded. Grace stood with her mother's letter in one hand and her brother's medal now resting on the desk between them. She looked at Vanessa. No anger. That was what frightened Vanessa most. Grace did not look angry. She looked certain. You tried to erase my brother before we even found him, Grace said. Vanessa's mouth trembled. You have no idea what families like this require. Grace took one step closer. I know exactly what families require. Vanessa sneered. Do you? Grace's voice did not rise. Yes. Truth. Memory. And someone brave enough to stop pretending cruelty is protection. Charles looked at her. The words landed in him like a promise. Outside the library, the guests and staff were still gathered silent behind the half-open door. They had heard enough. Vanessa realized it too late. Her face changed. The performance tried to return, but there was nowhere left for it to stand. Charles opened the library door fully. Everyone in the hallway could see her now. Not as the wounded fiancée. Not as the future Mrs. Whitmore. As the woman who had conspired to bury a lost brother's name for inheritance, control, and status. Charles stepped aside. Vanessa, he said, leave this house. Her eyes widened. You cannot mean that. I do. The engagement is over. A gasp moved through the hallway. Vanessa looked at Grace, then at Charles, then at the file on the desk. For the first time all day she had no weapon left. No tears. No threat. No lie strong enough. Harold stood beside the portrait of Thomas Whitmore, his old shoulders shaking. Grace held her mother's letter to her heart. Charles closed his hand over Aaron's medal again. And the Whitmore estate, after years of polished silence, finally chose the truth over the lie that had almost inherited everything. Vanessa Hart left the Whitmore estate with nothing but her suitcase, her broken pride, and the sound of the door closing behind her. But inside the library, the real ending was only beginning. Charles Whitmore placed Aaron's medal beside Elena Miller's letter. Harold Bennett stood nearby crying silently, finally free from a promise that had become a prison. Grace Miller looked at the file on the desk and understood the truth. Her mother had not been weak. She had been silenced. Her brother had not been forgotten. He had been hidden. And now, for the first time, his name was spoken openly in the house that once tried to erase him. Charles turned to Grace. I cannot change what this family did, he said. But I can make sure the truth is never buried again. Grace looked at him, tears falling freely now. My mother asked for forgiveness, she whispered. But forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. Charles nodded. It means facing what happened. Outside, the guests had gone quiet. The staff stood taller. The mansion felt different now. Less perfect. More human. Grace picked up the medal and held it to her heart. And in that moment, the cleaner who had been treated like nobody became the woman who brought the truth home. Never mistake someone's quietness for weakness. Some people are silent because they are carrying pain with grace. But when truth finally rises, no money, no status, and no lie can stop it. Have you ever seen someone underestimated only to reveal incredible strength? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us why dignity, truth, and kindness still matter.